Definitely getting some John Wayne Sands of Iwo Jima memories as I do this history hike. This is one of the first times I'm wearing gear in an environment that the gear was actually worn in. Here in Texas, it's hot, it's humid, and I'm just thanking my lucky stars I'm not in wool right now. I had to find a different locale to do this hike. I didn't feel like walking through the normal woods was appropriate, so I had to find something with a lot of overgrowth. It's kind of this watery Pacific feel. To be honest, I'm doing my best not to get bit by a snake. Honestly, people say that. I'm doing my best not to get bit by a snake, but really, is that much in my control? I think that's kind of up to the snake. One of the elements that sets apart a World War II Marine visually has got to be the camouflage on the helmet. It's reversible camouflage. Currently, I've got on the tan version. You reverse it, it's more green, and it's commonly called frog skin because it represents the mottled back of a frog. But another popular name for it is duck hunter. And let me tell you why. Yeah, so many of the things we have now were born from surplus World War II gear or uniform or equipment getting a new lease on life. Cheetos. Cheetos exist because a businessman got a deal on all the leftover powdered cheese from World War II. Well, the same thing goes for this camouflage. So much of this patterned cloth was made, they had a lot of surplus after the war. So what did they do with it? Well, mostly they sold it. And it wound up in sporting magazines, and hunters picked up this pattern. And that's why it became known as duck hunter or duck hunt. Of course, this duck hunter camouflage, you might wonder why is it just on the helmet covers? And you may have even seen pictures where it's not. You could have seen pictures where the Marines are wearing a bodysuit of this camouflage, and those were made. And they were even sent to the European front. And there's an urban legend out there that the suits weren't used because they led to friendly fire incidents, because the camouflage pattern was very close to a camouflage pattern utilized by the Nazis, especially their paratroopers, and it led to mistaken identities. Is that true? No. Yeah, the pattern was really close, but honestly, the reason that this camouflage wasn't utilized at a greater level, and the reason the Marines never utilized it at a greater level, one, it was too expensive to kind of build out the full suits, and two, it actually didn't work real well. What soldiers actually mostly put out there was that these camouflage patterns, when the whole suit was put into play, people actually, you stuck out more than if you were just wearing the normal green that I'm wearing here. The Marine Corps actually used a different pack than the Army. The Marine Corps pack, this is actually just the top half of it. There was a bottom bag that could attach. You can attach your poncho, bedroll, anything like that. I'm just carrying the top half today. Kind of interesting that the Army's using one, and the Army's was developed during World War I, with very little differences in World War II, and the Marines had something just slightly different. The Marines put out a call for a fighting knife. The fighting knife in World War I, if you've ever seen one, is kind of unwieldy. It had knuckle dusters. It was heavy. It was kind of based on a stiletto, so it broke easily. I mean, it was good at stabbing people, but not much else. And the Marines wanted a fighting knife that could double as a utility knife, and that is where the famous Marine Corps K-bar appears. Now, K-bar, it sounds like a military designation, K-bar, but actually it comes from an interesting story about the knife makers who originally made it. Now, during World War II, different factories made this pattern according to the Marine Corps specifications. As you can see, it's it's very much a buoy type look. And there's a reason for that. It was originally kind of conceived toward the end of the 19th century. And apparently the knife makers got a letter of recommendation from a frontiersman who used this. And he was really proud of it because he used it to kill the bear. But apparently either his spelling wasn't so good or the letter was damaged in transit, and all they could read was kill the bar or kabar. Anyway, K-bar, the kill the bear knife. They started using that in their advertisements, kill the bear, and it became K-bar. So it's really not a military designation at all. It's from the kill the bear saying. And they still, obviously, this knife has become one of the most popular knife patterns in history, and it's still reproduced today. You can get it almost anywhere from almost any knife manufacturer, and you can get ones that are officially Marine Corps approved. There is a saying that every Marine's a rifleman, but not every Marine carries a rifle. What I've been carrying on this hike is a Thompson submachine gun, which is kind of an iconic look for the Second World War. You know, the Tommy gun was built for World War I as a light machine gun for the trenches. And essentially it got released too late to really have any impact on that conflict. And mostly we know it because of its popularity in the post-war years with law enforcement and lawbreakers. You know, you see John Dillinger and Bonnie and Clyde and the G-Men all using the civilian version of a Thompson submachine gun. The War Department was never very fond of the Tommy gun. The Marines also were not very fond of the Tommy gun. But there was a ton of them left in surplus, so they wound up using them in World War II. And, you know, of course, the look of them, we see them in movies and everything else because of the look. But they didn't really like the Thompson very much. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And you kind of feel it, even with this reproduction Tommy gun, you feel it. One, the Thompson is incredibly heavy. And I mean, a light machine gun, something this small, should be more portable, lighter than the rifle, but it's really not. For instance, the M1 carbine it's incredibly light compared to this. It's unwieldy, it's light, it snags on stuff, but there was also a concern by the Marines that, especially in jungle overgrowth, it just wasn't powerful enough to penetrate essentially the jungle foliage, that you really weren't getting a much bang for your buck. Now, Marines in World War II did like to have the Tommy gun handy because of its rate of fire, especially, for instance, 60 mortarmen or those who did not carry a rifle. They'd like to get a hold of a Thompson and especially have it like in a foxhole. In case the Japanese popped out of a foxhole, this was something that was easy to just point and shoot at close range. So one thing I've noticed on this hike is a lot of the documentary evidence you have, the photographs, you start seeing a lot of variety in what Marines are actually carrying out in the field, which I think is kind of due to the conditions. You know, you're landing on, say, Peleliu or Tarawa or Iwo Jima, and you're just in the roughest conditions imaginable for days, weeks. You're ditching what you don't need. There's kind of a more lackadaisical attitude about your uniform. You know, are you cutting off the sleeves? You know, you get to Guadalcanal. Are you cutting off the legs of your pants and turning them into shorts? And that was one of the things that was most difficult about researching for this particular history hike. Is there's a lot of information on what Marines should have been wearing, but when you start comparing it to the actual photographs, you find out that, well, a lot of times they weren't wearing that. You know, for instance, right now, I'm only wearing the top portion of the Marine pack, not the bottom portion. And in a lot of photographs, they're not wearing packs at all. They've thrown them down, or they've got them at a staging area or something of that nature, and they're basically stripped down to fight. that's something I've realized as I've gone through is, the Marines have the reputation, much like the British Army, of being very squared away, to the extent that I am certain that I have done many things wrong just in my accoutrements, that a Marine, even a modern Marine, would look at and go, you have made elementary mistakes. At the same time, they have that mindset, but they also got the job done however it could be done. And that's what you see in those pictures, is you see Marines wearing the equipment they need, not necessarily the equipment they're told to wear. So obviously, fighting in the Pacific, hydration was pretty important. It was not uncommon. I think it was probably common practice to have at least 2 canteens, if not more. So the drink mattered. Water mattered. Famously on Peleliu, the Marines went ashore, but all the water that they sent ashore was packed in empty oil drums. So it was basically undrinkable because of the oil aftertaste. All the rations, breakfast, you would have had the standard powdered coffee, but you also had what they called battery acid, which was labeled lemon powder. As you can see, it doesn't really impart much color, but they called it battery acid, and you wonder why. Because it's awful. Because it's pretty awful. Battery acid, because of basically the heavy acidic taste. But I guess beggars can't be choosers. Or maybe we can. After all, I'm not in the Pacific. So if you couldn't really stop to eat as a Marine, you had the same options that, like say, a paratrooper on the European theater would have had. You've got the U.S. Army D ration, which is essentially a chocolate bar. It's kind of in a waxed paper to kind of give it a little bit of waterproof. The boxes are interestingly labeled. They've always got hints and tips. For this one is very specific. To be eaten slowly in about half an hour. They actually were worried that troops would be eating these for fun. The designer famously said he wanted this to taste maybe just a little better than a boiled potato. And troops weren't real fond of this. You did not really want to sit down and eat it all at once. You did eat it slowly for that calorie boost. Some people crumbled it up and used it as basically hot chocolate. But they came out with a better version. It's called the Hershey's Tropical Bar. And as you can tell from just the wrapping, it's kind of branded. It says Hershey's. It's got a tropical tag here. They made some improvements. One, you can tell it's a little bit smaller. Two, it tastes better. They gave it better taste. They were like, you know what? You're fighting a war. Have some chocolate. And also, it was designed to handle the heat better than the D ration. And this is particularly in response to Marines in the Pacific Theater. You just don't want melted chocolate. What does it taste like? Slightly sweeter baker's chocolate. That's what it tastes like. So as far as food goes, Marines, maybe more than the Army in Europe, had to rely on rations versus like field kitchens. You start the war with C rations. Come in a can. This is not the entire C ration. There are multiple cans. They actually were pretty bulky. And they very quickly started looking for something that wasn't a C ration. Plus, it's a little loud as well. On the flip side, soldiers did kind of use the containers for some of their personal items once they were done. Now, the next thing they developed was the K-Ration. The K-Ration, they had one for dinner, for supper, and for breakfast. This particular one is supper. And this was easy to carry with you. You just stick it in your pack, carry it with you, didn't need cooking. Paratroopers, this was designed with that in mind. You're carrying a lot with you. Marines only slightly less so, as you're hitting a beach and you don't know how long you're going to be there. Is it going to be days, weeks, months? Are you looking at a Guadalcanal type situation? Now, the thing about the K-Ration, they, realized that morale and food were closely interlinked. And they did what they could to make the food taste better. They were limited on that. But they decided that they were going to change the packaging. Late in the war, they went from the plain packaging to something called morale packaging. And the morale packaging was just, it was brighter, fancier, labeled bigger, had a nice font, some stars. That's really the difference. With morale packaging is it was colored versus this. And it's funny that the little things in a war that might matter. I have some examples here of, I went ahead and carried a dinner ration so you could see. And also, just to complete the trifecta, a breakfast ration. So that was the morale rationing. So this was my ration for the day, these 3 boxes, which is still kind of a big load in someone's pack. You saw a Marine's pack that I was carrying and lugging this around. How many of these could you really lug around? You have pockets that you can add to, you make do, but it's still interesting that, food is one of those items that you really can't collapse down to a great extent. Not even today. Look at the MREs for modern soldiers. It's still kind of a giant bag of stuff. So it's interesting. I guess we haven't really gotten to the point where we can just pop a pill. And the morale packaging concept gives you the idea that even if we could just pop a pill, would you want to for the morale effect? Right now, my main concern is getting back up this hill without getting snake bit or collapsing due to heat stroke. One thing to remember, though, with all these history hikes, I am a history guy, not necessarily a World War II guy or Marine guy. There are living historians who are so steeped in the knowledge, they can tell where I'm sloppy or getting things wrong. And I always encourage people to basically check out as many sources as possible if what you see here interests you. I hope you enjoyed this history hike. Peace out. Back.